For 15 years, she built an empire by his side. For 8 months, he cheated on her with a gold-digging socialite. She had one night to show him who really called the shots. Edward Santana, the celebrity surgeon, thought he could trade his wife, Lucy, for a younger version without consequences. He introduced his mistress, Vera, as his new girlfriend in the same social circles he'd frequented with his wife for decades. But when Lucy showed up at the most important charity gala of the year, she in red Valentino, his mistress in a cheap animal print dress, the tables turned in a way no one expected. Some women, when they finally decide to stop pretending not to see the obvious, don't just become queens. They become absolute queens. And Edward was about to discover that the woman he'd underestimated for years had only been saving her claws for the right moment. Lucy watched from the window of her duplex apartment in Barra da Tijuca as the golden late-afternoon sun painted the sea in amber tones. At 40, she had a natural elegance that made people turn to admire her wherever she went. Her brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, framing a face that time had only refined, never aged. "Mommy, Daddy's here!" shouted Enzo, her 5-year-old son, running through the living room with his arms out like an airplane. The boy had his father's same intense green eyes, but his mother's sweet, genuine smile. Mateus, 10, looked up from his tablet and just nodded. The older boy had started to notice the tensions at home, the prolonged silences during dinners, his mother's forced smiles when Edward came home too late, smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers. Edward Santana, 45, was the most sought-after plastic surgeon in Rio de Janeiro. His clinic in the South Zone served the country's most famous celebrities, and his schedule was always full of procedures that cost more than many people earned in a year. Tall and dark-haired, with a smile that melted hearts, and a natural charm that opened every door, he had built an empire based on the vanity of others and his own exceptional skill. "Honey," Edward kissed Lucy's forehead distractedly, already checking messages on his phone. "I need to leave early today. I have an emergency surgery." It was the third emergency of the week. Lucy had stopped questioning him a long time ago. She knew Edward loved her in his own way, but she also knew he loved himself more, along with the adrenaline of always wanting more. More women, more adventures, more excitement than a stable marriage could offer. "Of course," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll put your plate in the fridge." During dinner, Lucy watched her children. Enzo chattered about a drawing he'd made at school, showing a picture of the family where everyone was holding hands and smiling. Mateus remained quiet, occasionally casting questioning glances at his father's empty chair. "Where's Daddy?" Enzo asked for the 3rd time. "Working, my love. He's saving lives," Lucy answered, repeating the same lie she had told countless times. Mateus looked at her with an expression that seemed too old for his 10 years. "Mommy, why is Daddy always working when other dads are home?" Lucy's heart ached. She had grown up in a humble family in Niterói, the daughter of a hard-working mechanic and a seamstress who always found time for her and her siblings. She met Edward in college, where she was studying business administration, and he was in medical school. Back then, he was different. Ambitious, yes, but also caring and passionate. They married soon after his graduation, and Lucy gave up her own professional dreams to support him in building his medical career. She had been his first investor, using the small inheritance she received from her grandparents to help him set up his first office. She had been his secretary, his scheduler, his public relations. When the children were born, she became a dedicated mother while continuing to be the wife who organized his life, accompanied him to social events, and smiled for photos in gossip magazines as the perfect wife of the famous doctor. But somewhere along the way, Edward had forgotten who had been by his side from the beginning. The first betrayals began 3 years ago, discreet enough that she could pretend not to know. Text messages he hid on his phone, different perfumes, strange calls he took in his office. Lucy discovered the first time by accident when she found a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket. She confronted him that night, and Edward had cried, begged for forgiveness, and promised it would never happen again. He said it had been a moment of weakness, that he loved her, and that his family was the most important thing to him. She believed him because she wanted to. After 15 years together, after 2 children, after building an entire life with him, the alternative seemed impossible to face. But the betrayals continued, each one more blatant and less hidden than the last. Her friends began to whisper as she passed by at social events, the pitiful looks from the other doctors' wives, the muffled giggles when she arrived alone at a party, once again because Edward was working. Lucy knew she was being ridiculed, but with each confrontation, Edward managed to manipulate the situation. He was a master at making her feel paranoid, jealous, and overly dramatic. "Lucy, you're imagining things. You know how my schedule is. I work to give you guys the best," he would say, always ending with promises, declarations of love, and a few days of exemplary behavior before everything started all over again. That night, after putting the boys to bed, Lucy sat at her vanity and looked at herself in the mirror. She was still beautiful, still desirable. At 40, she had a body that many 20-year-olds envied, maintained through regular exercise, and a discipline that Edward never needed because she organized even his diet. She had sacrificed her own dreams, her own career, and her own identity to be the perfect wife. And what had she gotten in return? A husband who respected her so little that he didn't even bother to properly hide his affairs. Her phone vibrated with a message. It was her best friend, Carla. "Saw Edward at the Fasano today, holding hands with a woman. Lucy, we need to talk." Lucy closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She knew this moment would come. The question was no longer whether he was cheating, but when she would have the courage to do something about it. She looked at their wedding photo on the vanity. 2 young, smiling people, full of dreams and promises. She barely recognized the woman in the picture, not physically, but spiritually. Where was that determined girl who had given up everything to support the man she loved? Where was the Lucy who had her own opinions, who dreamed of her own career, who didn't ask anyone's permission to be who she was? In the next room, she could hear Edward talking softly on the phone, probably arranging the next meeting, the next lie, the next humiliation. Lucy got up and walked to the window. The city stretched out before her, full of lights and possibilities. Somewhere out there was the woman she had been before she became just Dr. Edward's wife. It was time to start looking for her. The conversation with Carla was more painful than Lucy had expected. They met at a discreet cafe in Ipanema, away from the places frequented by Edward's social circle. Carla, a freelance journalist who had known Lucy since college, didn't try to sugarcoat the situation. "Lucy, she's not just an affair anymore. He's introducing her as his girlfriend," Carla said, holding her friend's hands. "The woman's name is Vera Montero. She's a socialite who recently divorced an oil tycoon. They went to the Marcelo Cohen Gallery's vernissage last week, the book launch for Marina Silva, and yesterday they were having lunch at the Fasano, as if they were an official couple." Lucy felt her stomach churn. One thing was the one-night stands, the casual affairs she had learned to ignore for the sake of preserving her family. It was something else entirely for him to be building a public relationship, introducing another woman in the social circles they had frequented together for years. "There's more," Carla hesitated. "She posted a photo on Instagram last night. The 2 of them were at a party you were supposed to go to with him." Lucy remembered. It was Dr. Marcelo Ribeiro's birthday party, one of Edward's partners at the clinic. Edward had told her she had a headache and couldn't go. Lucy actually did have a headache, but she would have gone if he had pushed a little. Instead, he seemed relieved when she said she would stay home. "Show me," Lucy asked. Carla reluctantly handed over her phone. On the screen, a blonde woman in her mid-30s, clearly maintained by expensive surgeries and treatments, smiled next to Edward. She was wearing a navy blue dress that Lucy recognized. Edward had complimented a similar one in a Louis Vuitton window last week, saying it would look beautiful on her. Apparently, he had bought it for someone else. What hurt the most was seeing Edward in the photo. He was genuinely smiling, his eyes sparkling in a way Lucy hadn't seen directed at her in years. His hand was possessively on Vera's waist, and he was looking at her as if she were the most fascinating woman in the world. "Lucy, you need to protect yourself," Carla said softly. "Financially, legally. This isn't about saving the marriage anymore. This is about you not walking away from this empty-handed after everything you've done for him." Lucy knew Carla was right, but the reality still felt surreal. 15 years of marriage, 2 children, a life built brick by brick. How could someone just throw all that away? When she got home, Edward was in his office on the phone. She paused at the door and watched him. He was laughing at something the person on the other end of the line had said, an intimate, affectionate laugh. The same laugh he used to have when he talked to her in the early years of their marriage. "No, I can't tonight. I have family commitments," he was saying. "But we'll see each other tomorrow. I love you too." "I love you too." The words hit Lucy like a punch to the stomach. When was the last time Edward had said that to her? She couldn't even remember. Edward hung up and turned around, startling when he saw her at the door. For a fraction of a second, she saw guilt in his eyes, but he quickly composed himself. "Hey, honey, I was just talking to Dr. Mendez about tomorrow's case." He lied without a second thought. Lucy stared at him for a long moment. "Edward, we need to talk." Sure, but I can't now. I have a conference call with Sao Paulo in 5 minutes. How about after dinner?" Another stall, another excuse. Lucy nodded and left the office. She knew that conversation would never happen. Edward had become a master at avoiding confrontations, at always having something more urgent to do when she tried to address their relationship problems. That night, during dinner, Lucy watched her husband interact with their children. Edward was still a caring father when he was present. He helped Enzo with his math homework, talked to Mateus about soccer, and made jokes that made the boys laugh. It was in these moments that Lucy's resolve would falter. How could she destroy this family dynamic because of her own pain? But when Edward said he needed to leave early because of a hospital emergency, and she saw Vera post a photo on Instagram at the exact moment he left the house, a picture at a Japanese restaurant in Ipanema, Lucy knew she had reached her limit. She put the boys to bed and locked herself in the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a tired woman. A woman who had spent too many years pretending not to see the obvious. Her eyes, once bright with life and determination, now seemed dull and resigned. Lucy took out her phone and called her younger sister, Marina, who lived in Sao Paulo and worked as a lawyer. "Marina, I need help," she said. As soon as her sister answered, "Lucy, what happened? Are you okay?" "No, I'm not okay, and I need a lawyer." A good divorce lawyer. There was silence on the other end of the line. Marina had always been suspicious of Edward, always felt he didn't deserve Lucy, but she had never said it directly. "Lucy, are you sure?" "I'm sure I can't live like this anymore. I'm sure my children deserve to see their mother being respected. I'm sure I deserve more than this." "Okay, I'll recommend the best family lawyer I know. He's discreet, efficient, and will protect your interests. But Lucy, you need to start documenting everything. Photos, conversations, bank statements, anything that proves the assets you built together." After hanging up, Lucy felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time in a long time, she was making an active decision about her own life, instead of just reacting to Edward's decisions. She spent the rest of the night organizing documents, making copies of bank statements, and taking pictures of valuable assets in the house. With each document she found, she discovered investments Edward had made without consulting her, accounts he kept on his own, and excessive expenses she hadn't even known existed. When Edward came home at 2 in the morning, smelling of Vera's perfume, Lucy was in bed pretending to be asleep. He took a long shower, probably to get rid of any evidence, and lay down on the other side of the bed as if nothing had happened. Lucy stayed awake the rest of the night, planning her next steps. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking only of her children or Edward. She was thinking about herself, the woman she had been, the woman she could be again. The dawn brought crystal clarity. Lucy was no longer going to accept crumbs of attention. She was no longer going to pretend not to see the obvious. She was no longer going to sacrifice her dignity for the sake of a domestic peace that, in reality, was just a well-disguised lie. It was time to take back her life. The meeting with the lawyer was a dose of reality that Lucy had not expected. Dr. Roberto Mendez, recommended by Marina as the best family law attorney in Rio, was a serious, direct man who didn't waste time with pleasantries. Mrs. Santana, based on what you've told me and the documents you've brought, you have a considerable estate. The clinic, the properties, the investments. You are entitled to 50% of everything that was built during the marriage. And considering you gave up your career to support his, there's also the issue of alimony. Lucy knew they had money, but she had never stopped to calculate exactly how much. Edward had always controlled the finances, giving her a generous allowance for personal and household expenses, but keeping her away from the big financial decisions. There's one thing I need to warn you about, the lawyer continued. If your husband is maintaining a public relationship with another woman and spending marital money on her, this can be characterized as asset dissipation. We need to act quickly to protect your assets. This information was like a slap in the face. It wasn't enough that Edward was emotionally cheating. He was literally spending the money she had helped build on his mistress. What do I need to do? First, open a bank account of your own. Second, start transferring half the money from the joint accounts. Third, make a complete inventory of all assets. Fourth, if possible, get evidence of the betrayals and expenses with the other woman. Lucy left the lawyer's office with a to-do list and a strange sense of power. For the first time in years, she was making practical, concrete decisions about her own life. Her first stop was the bank. Lucy discovered they had much more money than she had imagined. Checking accounts, investments, savings. The empire Edward had built was impressive, and she was legally entitled to half of it. When the manager suggested she talk to Edward before making any moves, Lucy interrupted him with a firmness she didn't know she possessed. I don't need my husband's authorization to move money that is also mine. Please proceed with the transfers I requested. The manager, a little taken aback by her determination, processed the transfers without further question. Within an hour, Lucy had a substantial bank account of her own, for the first time in 15 years. The following days were filled with intense preparation. Lucy hired a private investigator recommended by the lawyer, a discreet man named Carlos, who specialized in infidelity cases. She needed solid evidence, not just rumors and Instagram photos. Mrs. Santana, in 3 days I'll have a complete report for you. Places they frequent, times, expenses, everything documented, Carlos assured her. Meanwhile, Lucy began to rebuild her network. She called old college friends and reconnected with professional contacts she had abandoned when she became just a wife and mother. She discovered that a university friend, Beatrice, had started a business consulting firm and needed someone with administrative experience. Lucy, you were always the most organized in our class. And with your experience managing Edward's career, you have skills that many companies need, Beatrice said during a lunch. When you're ready to get back into the workforce, we have a position waiting for you. For the first time in years, Lucy imagined having her own career, earning her own money, and being recognized for her competence, and not just for being the wife of someone famous. At home, she maintained her normal routine with the boys, but Edward began to notice that something was different. Lucy stopped asking where he was going, stopped staying up late, waiting for him to come home, and stopped having those tense arguments that always ended with him managing to turn the tables and make her feel guilty. "You're acting strange," he commented one morning while having coffee. "Strange how?" Lucy asked, keeping her voice neutral. "I don't know. Different, more distant?" Lucy almost laughed. He was complaining about her being distant when he spent more time with his mistress than at home. But she just smiled and said, "Maybe I'm finally learning to worry less about things that are out of my control." Edward looked at her with curiosity, but didn't press the issue. He was too busy with his own games to realize that Lucy had stopped playing. The investigator's report arrived on a Friday, and was even more shocking than Lucy had expected. Edward and Vera had been together for 8 months, much longer than Lucy had imagined. They had an apartment he rented in her name in Copacabana, where they met regularly. Edward had bought Vera a car, a convertible BMW that cost 200,000 reais. They had traveled together to Buenos Aires last month, when he had told Lucy he was at a medical conference. What hurt the most were the photos. Edward and Vera in intimate situations, at romantic restaurants, walking hand in hand on the beach. In all the pictures, Edward looked happier and more relaxed than Lucy had seen him at home in years. But what really made her furious was discovering that Edward had taken Vera to meet some of their friends, introducing her as his special friend. People who greeted Lucy with fake kisses at parties already knew and approved of her replacement. That weekend, Edward went out on Saturday, saying he was going to play tennis with friends. Lucy knew from the report that he was going to meet Vera for an afternoon at the Copacabana apartment. Instead of staying home to stew, she called a babysitter for the boys and went out. She went to a hair salon in Barra, where she got a modern haircut, painted her nails a vibrant red, and got a more striking makeup look than she usually wore. Then she went shopping, buying clothes that accentuated her beauty instead of the conservative outfits Edward always said he preferred. When he got home at the end of the day, Lucy was in the living room watching a movie with the boys. She was wearing a new dress, low-cut enough to be elegant but provocative, and her hair fell in sensual waves over her shoulders. Edward stopped at the living room door and looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Was it surprise? Admiration? Maybe even a little desire? Something she hadn't seen in his eyes in a long time. "You look beautiful," he said, and for the first time in months, he seemed sincere. "Thank you," Lucy answered simply, without the grateful smile she used to give when he complimented her. That night, Edward tried to approach her in bed, touching her arm softly. Lucy naturally moved away. "I'm tired," she said without drama or accusation, just a fact. Edward was silent for a moment. "Lucy, is everything okay between us?" She turned to look at him. "Why wouldn't it be? I don't know. You seem different lately." Lucy smiled in the darkness. "Maybe I'm just finally growing up, Edward. It happens to everyone sooner or later." He didn't reply, but Lucy knew she had planted a seed of unease in his mind. Men like Edward liked to have control over all the pieces of the game. When one of the pieces started to move independently, they became nervous, and Lucy was just beginning to move. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a messenger on elegant embossed paper. Santa Cruz Hospital Charity Gala, a night in support of the new pediatric wing. The date was 2 weeks away, and Lucy knew it would be the social event of the year. All the city's renowned doctors would be there, along with their wives and the karaoke elite. Edward came home that night visibly agitated. He walked into the room where Lucy was reading, holding the invitation in his hands. "Lucy, about the Santa Cruz gala," he began hesitantly. "Yes, I received the invitation. It's going to be a beautiful event," she replied without looking up from her book. "It's just, well, this year it's going to be different. I have a lot of professional commitments at the party. I'll need to move around a lot." Lucy finally looked at him. "And? Maybe it's better if you don't go. I know you don't really like those long parties. And with the kids." So that was it. Edward wanted to take Vera to the most important event on the medical social calendar, but he couldn't officially appear with his mistress while he was still married. The solution he found was to simply get rid of his wife. "Edward," Lucy said calmly, closing her book, "I'm going to the gala. In fact, I've already bought my dress." This was a lie, but she saw panic cross his eyes. "Lucy, be reasonable. It's going to be a night of work for me, not fun. You'll be bored. Don't worry about me. I know how to behave at social events. After all, I've been doing it by your side for 15 years. Edward tried a few more arguments, but Lucy was unyielding. She was going to the gala. Period. When he left the room, she heard him talking on the phone in his office, clearly trying to solve the problem she had become. In the following days, Lucy prepared for the gala as if it were a battle, because, in a way, it was exactly that. She chose a red Valentino dress that cost a small fortune, but made her look like a goddess. The neckline was elegant yet striking. The color highlighted her skin, and the cut accentuated her curves flawlessly. Carlos, the investigator, informed her that Vera had bought a dress with a leopard print at a boutique in Ipanema. "She'll be there, ma'am. Your husband got her an invitation through Dr. Marcello." Lucy smiled. "Perfect. Let the games begin." On the morning of the gala, Lucy spent the day at the spa. A massage, a facial, a manicure, and a pedicure. She wanted to be absolutely radiant. Then she went to the hairdresser, where she got a sophisticated updo that exposed her neck, highlighting the delicate white gold diamond necklace she would wear. A piece of jewelry Edward had given her for their 10th wedding anniversary, back when he still pretended to care about special dates. Edward left the house before her, claiming he needed to get there early to handle technical matters. Lucy knew he wanted time to meet Vera and coordinate how they would act during the party. When Lucy arrived at the Copacabana Palace, where the event was being held, she caused a stir. Several people who had known her for years went out of their way to compliment her, commenting on how stunning she looked. She greeted everyone with grace and elegance, talking about her children, complimenting the other women's dresses, being the perfect society lady she had always been. That's when she saw her. Vera was in the center of a group of people, laughing too loudly and gesturing in an exaggerated way. The leopard print dress was flashy, but in a way that screamed new money trying to impress. She was beautiful, Lucy had to admit, but there was a certain desperation in her demeanor, as if she were constantly trying to prove she belonged there. Edward was by her side, introducing her to people Lucy had known for years. She could see his uncomfortable expression when he realized Lucy had arrived. Lucy grabbed a glass of champagne and positioned herself strategically near the group. She didn't go directly to confront them. That would be tacky. Instead, she simply began talking to Dr. Mariana, a cardiologist she had known since Edward was a resident. "Lucy, what a surprise to see you here. I thought you weren't coming," Dr. Mariana said, clearly unaware of the delicate situation. "Why wouldn't I come? I love these charity events, and Edward always needs support on important nights," Lucy replied with a smile, speaking loudly enough to be heard by the group next to her. Edward heard her and turned around. For a second, he looked like a teenager caught doing something forbidden. Vera also looked over, assessing Lucy from head to toe with calculating eyes. "Edward!" Lucy called sweetly. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" The silence that followed was deafening. All conversations around them stopped. Edward was pale, Vera was flushed, and about 20 people were looking on, waiting to see how the situation would play out. "Lucy, Edward stammered. "Hi?" Vera stepped forward, extending her hand with a forced smile. "I'm Vera, Edward's friend." Lucy shook her hand firmly, maintaining eye contact. "Lucy, Edward's wife of 15 years. The introduction landed like a bomb on the group. Vera tried to hide her embarrassment, but Lucy could see the desperation in her eyes. Edward looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. "What a lovely dress you have," Lucy continued, examining Vera from head to toe. "Animal print is a brave choice." Lucy's seemingly innocent tone carried enough venom to kill an elephant. Some of the women in the group stifled giggles, perfectly understanding the double meaning. "Thank you," Vera replied, trying to maintain her composure. "Yours is very classic, too. Valentino," Lucy said simply. "I bought it especially for tonight. Edward always says red is my color." She looked directly at her husband as she said this. Dr. Marcello, sensing the tension in the air, tried to break the ice. "Lucy, you're radiant. How are the kids?" "They're great, thank you. Mateus is excelling at soccer, and Enzo is learning piano. Edward is a wonderful father when he gets some time off from surgeries." Every word was carefully chosen. Every pause was calculated. Lucy was completely dominating the situation, making it clear to everyone present exactly who the legitimate wife was and who the intruder was. Vera, realizing she was losing the battle, tried a counteroffensive. "Edward told me you don't work. It must be wonderful to have so much free time." Lucy smiled. It was the exact opening she had been waiting for. "You're right. I don't work a job outside the home. I've spent the last 15 years investing in my husband's success. I was the one who financed his first office, who organized his schedule in the early years, who took care of all the personal aspects so he could focus on his career. It's fascinating how some people confuse strategic investment with idleness." The entire group was now completely focused on the conversation. It was better than a TV drama. "Dr." Marcello tried again to change the subject, but Lucy wasn't finished. "But you're right about one thing. Now, I have a lot of free time, so much so that I'm going back to work. I received a very interesting offer from a consulting firm. It's going to be exciting to have my own career again." Edward looked at her with genuine surprise. This was the first time he had heard about Lucy's professional plans. "What kind of consulting?" Dr. Mariana asked, genuinely interested. "Strategic management for professionals. Doctors, lawyers, architects, people who are excellent at what they do technically, but need help with the administrative and marketing aspects. It's incredible how some talented professionals can be so naive when it comes to managing their personal careers." Once again, the comment had a double meaning. Lucy was making it clear that Edward owed his success in part to her management. Vera was visibly uncomfortable. She had expected to find a submissive, insecure wife, not an elegant, intelligent woman who was clearly in control of the situation. "Well," Edward said finally, "I think we should circulate a little. Lucy, do you mind if I introduce Vera to some colleagues?" "Of course not," Lucy replied gracefully. "After all, it's important for your friends to meet the right people." Edward quickly led Vera away, but Lucy could see them talking intensely a few feet away. Vera was gesturing nervously, clearly upset about how things had gone. "Lucy," Dr. Mariana approached when they were alone. "Are you okay? This must be difficult." Lucy smiled genuinely for the first time that night. "You know, Mariana, I'm better than I've been in years. Sometimes we need to be reminded of who we really are." The rest of the night was a lesson in class and elegance. Lucy moved through the event, greeting people she hadn't talked to properly in years, rediscovering connections she had neglected while dedicating herself exclusively to the role of a wife. She talked about art with a gallery owner, about education with a private school principal, about investments with a financial consultant. With each conversation, she rediscovered aspects of herself that she had buried. Her intelligence, her ability to argue, her natural charm that had nothing to do with being the wife of someone famous. Edward and Vera, on the other hand, seemed increasingly out of place. Vera tried to compensate for the initial embarrassment by being even more expansive, laughing too loudly, touching Edward too much, and making comments that showed her lack of genuine sophistication. Around 11 o'clock, Lucy decided she had made her point. She approached Edward, who was talking to a group of surgeons. "Edward, dear, I need to go. I promised the babysitter I'd be back before midnight." He looked at her with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Do you want me to go with you?" "No, that's okay. I know how important these events are for your networking. Feel free to enjoy the party." Lucy said goodbye gracefully to everyone, including Vera, giving social air kisses as if nothing had happened. But when she leaned in close to Vera's ear to say goodbye, she whispered softly, "Good luck." They were just 2 words, but the tone carried all the confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. Lucy left the Copacabana Palace with her head held high, greeting acquaintances on the way. At the valet, while waiting for her car, she received several text messages. Friends, complimenting how beautiful she looked, professional contacts interested in discussing opportunities, even a few single men who had asked her friends for her number. When she finally got in the car, Lucy looked at herself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her was someone she had forgotten existed. A powerful, elegant, intelligent woman who, for the first time in years, was completely in control of her own story. Edward got home at 3 in the morning, clearly disturbed. Lucy pretended to be asleep, but she heard him walking around the house restless. She knew that the night had changed everything. Edward had realized he was no longer dealing with a submissive, predictable wife. He was dealing with a worthy adversary, and the game had just begun. The days after the gala were filled with a palpable tension in the Santana household. Edward was clearly shaken by what had happened at the event, but he didn't know how to approach Lucy. She, in turn, maintained a serenity that bordered on unsettling. There were no arguments, accusations, or tears, just a calm that made Edward more and more nervous. Lucy continued her normal routine with the children, but there was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there in years. She hummed as she made breakfast, smiled genuinely when Enzo told her about a school mischief, and talked to Mateus about his dreams and fears with a presence that had been absent for a long time. "Mommy, you're different," Mateus commented one Saturday morning while they were having breakfast together. "Different how?" Lucy asked, pouring more juice for her son. "Happier, even when Daddy's not here." The 10-year-old's observation was like a stab in Lucy's heart. Her children had noticed that she could only be genuinely happy in their father's absence, and that was more painful than any betrayal. "Sometimes, my love, people need to remember who they really are, and when that happens, they get happier." That afternoon, while Edward was at work, Lucy knew from the investigator that he was trying to calm down Vera, who had become hysterical after the humiliation at the gala. She received an unexpected visit. Dr. Marcelo Ribeiro, Edward's partner at the clinic, was at her door with a serious expression. "Lucy, can we talk?" She invited him in and served him coffee in the living room. Dr. Marcelo was a man of integrity who had always treated Lucy with genuine respect. "Lucy, I know it's none of my business, but Edward has been my partner for 10 years. What happened at the gala? Well, people are talking." "And what are they saying?" Lucy asked calmly. "That you publicly humiliated that woman. That it was a display of class against, well, against someone who clearly doesn't have any." Lucy smiled. "Dr. Marcelo, I simply introduced myself as Edward's wife. If that was humiliating for someone, maybe that person should rethink their position." "Lucy, Edward is making a monumental mistake. We all know that. That woman, she's a gold digger. She's clearly after his money, and he's too blind to see it. Why are you telling me this? Dr. Marcello sighed. Because you're the best thing that ever happened to Edward. Because your children need their parents together, and because, frankly, the clinic's reputation is starting to be affected by this situation. Lucy looked at him for a long moment. Dr. Marcello, I appreciate your concern, but my marriage ended the moment Edward decided to introduce another woman as his companion. All that's left is for me to decide how to deal with it. And how are you going to deal with it? With dignity, with intelligence, and by protecting my children and my rights. When Dr. Marcello left, Lucy knew the conversation would reach Edward's ears quickly. And it did. He came home that night visibly agitated. Lucy, we need to talk, now. She finished helping Enzo with his homework and went up to the bedroom with Edward. Marcello was here today, he began, closing the door. Yes, he was worried about you. Lucy, what do you want? Money? You can have half of everything. But you can't keep publicly humiliating me. Lucy sat in the armchair and looked at him. Edward, do you think this is about money? Isn't it? No. This is about respect. This is about 15 years of my life that I dedicated to you. This is about having raised 2 children practically on my own while you built your career. This is about having sacrificed my own dreams to support yours. Edward approached, trying a more conciliatory tone. Lucy, I know I made mistakes, but we can get past this. We can go to therapy, start over. Start over? Lucy laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Edward, you introduced your mistress as your girlfriend to our friends. You spent our money to support another woman. You systematically humiliated me for months, and now you want to start over? It was a moment of weakness. I was confused. 8 months of confusion, Edward? A rented apartment is confusion? A 200,000 race car is confusion? Edward paled. How do I know all this? Because, unlike you, I still have some intelligence. Did you really think you could live a second life without me finding out? Edward sat on the bed, running his hands through his hair. Lucy, I can explain. You don't need to explain. I understand perfectly. You fell in love with the feeling of being the powerful man, conquering a younger woman again. You liked being the generous provider, the mysterious and successful man. With her, you weren't just an overwhelmed husband and father with responsibilities. You were the passionate lover. The precision of Lucy's analysis left Edward speechless. The problem, Edward, is that you forgot that the image you sold to her was built by both of us. The money you spend on her is the result of a partnership, our marital partnership. The success that impresses her was built with my support, my dedication, my sacrifice. Lucy got up and walked to the window. You know what's saddest? You could have had both. You could have told me you were feeling bored, that you wanted more romance in our marriage. We could have worked together to rekindle the passion, but you chose the cowardice of betrayal over the courage of honesty. Lucy! Edward tried to get closer, but she raised her hand to stop him. No. Now you're going to listen to me. Monday morning, you will receive the divorce papers. I want half of everything. The clinic, the properties, the investments. I want alimony and shared custody of the boys. And I want you out of this house by the end of the month. Lucy, be reasonable. I am being more reasonable than you deserve. I could have done this in a scandalous way, involving the press and destroying your reputation. Instead, I'm offering a civilized divorce. And what if I don't agree? Lucy smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. Edward, do you really want to find out how far I can go when I stop being understanding? That night, Edward slept in the guest room. Lucy stayed awake planning the next steps. On Monday, in addition to the divorce papers, she would file a lawsuit for the partial dissolution of the clinic's partnership. Dr. Marcello had inadvertently given her the information she needed. As an undeclared but contributing partner to the initial investments in the clinic, she had rights that Edward hadn't even imagined. On Tuesday, Lucy officially started at Beatrice's consulting firm. Her first client was, ironically, a dermatologist who was having problems managing the finances of her expanding clinic. "It's impressive," Beatrice commented after Lucy's first week on the job. "You have a natural talent for this. Dr. Paula already said you saved her business." Lucy was rediscovering her professional competence, her ability to make strategic decisions, and her skill in dealing with people. These were qualities she had used for years to support Edward's career, but which she was now channeling to build her own professional identity. At home, she explained the situation to the boys, honestly, but in an age-appropriate way. "Daddy and Mommy are going to live in separate houses," she said, sitting between them on the couch. "That doesn't mean he loves you less, or that I love you less. It just means that we, as adults, need different arrangements to be happy." Mateus, the older one, asked direct questions. "Was it because of the woman at the party?" Lucy took a deep breath. "It was because of a lot of things, my love. But the important thing is that you will always have the love of both of your parents, no matter where each of us lives." Enzo, the younger one, was mainly concerned with practical matters. "Will I be able to take my toys to Daddy's house?" "Of course you can, my love." Edward tried several strategies in the following weeks. First emotional blackmail, then legal threats, then promises to change. Nothing worked. Lucy had transformed into an unassailable fortress. The final turning point came when Vera showed up at the house 3 weeks after the gala. It was a Saturday afternoon. Edward had gone out with the boys, and Lucy was at home organizing papers when the doorbell rang. Vera was clearly desperate. Without the careful makeup and expensive dresses, she looked like an ordinary middle-aged woman fighting against time. "I need to talk to you," she said when Lucy opened the door. Lucy invited her in, curious to see what her husband's mistress had to say. "Edward broke up with me," Vera said flatly. "He said he wants to try to save the marriage." Lucy served them water and sat down calmly. "And what does that have to do with me? You need to take him back. You have children, a life together." "Vera," Lucy interrupted. "You spent 8 months sleeping with my husband, spending my money, being introduced as his replacement in the social circles we've been in for 15 years. And now you come to my house to ask me to take him back? I know it was wrong, but it wasn't just wrong. It was pathetic. You're a 40-year-old woman, acting like a lovesick teenager over a married man. And now that he's tired of the game, you come running to me to fix the mess you made." Vera started to cry. "I thought he really loved me." Lucy looked at her with a mixture of pity and impatience. "Vera, men like Edward don't leave wives for mistresses. They use mistresses to feel young and powerful again. But when reality hits, they always go back to the security of what they already know. You were just an expensive diversion. So you're going to forgive him?" Lucy got up. "No, because unlike you, I have enough self-respect not to accept crumbs of attention from a man who clearly doesn't value me." After Vera left, Lucy felt strangely at peace. It was as if the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Edward had broken up with his mistress not out of love for his wife, but out of fear of the consequences of divorce. And Lucy finally had absolute certainty that she was making the right decision. 6 months later, Lucy was in her new apartment in Lagoa, a modern and elegant space that she had chosen and decorated herself. The boys had adapted well to the new routine, spending half the week with each parent. Edward had tried to reconcile several times, but Lucy stood firm. She had discovered that she was happier alone than she had been in the last years of her marriage. At the consulting firm, Lucy quickly became the most sought-after partner. Her ability to understand the complex dynamics of business, combined with a sharp intuition about human behavior, made her exceptional at solving problems that seemed impossible. One night, while working at home preparing a presentation for a new client, Lucy received a call from Dr. Marcello. "Lucy, I have a proposal for you." "I'm listening." I want you to be the executive administrator of the clinic. Edward has agreed to step away from administrative matters and focus only on medical procedures. We need someone with your strategic vision." Lucy smiled. The irony of the situation was delicious. Edward had lost his wife, but now he would have to work under her management. "Dr. Marcello, I'll consider your proposal, but if I accept, it will be on my terms. Full autonomy for all administrative and financial decisions. Of course, you'd be saving our clinic, Lucy, and we all know it." When she hung up, Lucy looked at herself in the living room mirror. The woman looking back at her was powerful, independent, and fulfilled. There were some wrinkles around her eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago, but they spoke of experience, of battles won, of wisdom gained. Her children were happy and secure. Her career was flourishing. Her financial life was solid. And for the first time in 15 years, she didn't depend on anyone to feel complete. Edward had tried to replace her with a younger, less questioning version. Instead, he had lost the only woman who truly knew and loved him. And now, he watched from afar as Lucy became more successful and happier than she had ever been during their marriage. That night, Lucy opened a bottle of champagne to celebrate. She wasn't celebrating the end of her marriage. That had been too painful to celebrate. She was celebrating the rebirth of Lucy Santana, the woman who had lost her way and had finally found her way back home. Back home to herself. Because sometimes, when a man tries to humiliate you by bringing his replacement into your world, the best revenge isn't to stoop to his level. It's to show that you don't just belong in that world. You can completely dominate it. And when that happens, you don't just become a queen. You become an absolute queen. 2 years later, the morning sun streamed through the large windows of Lucy's office on the top floor of the most modern commercial building in Barra da Tijuca. At 42, she had built an empire of her own that rivaled anything Edward had ever dreamed of achieving. Santana Strategic Consulting had become the most sought-after firm for professionals throughout Rio de Janeiro. And Lucy was regularly invited to speak at national conferences on business management. She was reviewing the third-quarter financial report when her secretary, Juliana, knocked on the door. "Mrs. Santana, Dr. Edward is here. He says it's about clinic matters." Lucy sighed softly. It had been 6 months since she had officially taken over as the clinic's executive administrator, and meetings between them were always tense. Not because of anger. Lucy had moved past that a long time ago. But because Edward was still clearly struggling to accept his new reality. "You can send him in." Edward entered the office, trying to maintain a professional demeanor, but Lucy could see the tension in his shoulders. He was thinner. There were gray hairs at his temples, and his eyes no longer had that arrogant spark from 2 years ago. Vera had lasted only 3 months after the divorce, and since then, Edward had had a series of superficial relationships that never lasted more than a few weeks. "Lucy," he greeted formally, sitting in the chair across from her desk. "Edward, what can I do for you?" "It's about the new protocols you've implemented at the clinic. Some of the doctors are complaining." Lucy raised her hand to interrupt him. "Edward, the protocols increased our efficiency by 30%, and our profit margin by 40%. If some doctors are complaining about having to follow basic quality procedures and schedules, maybe they aren't the right professionals for our team." "Our team," Edward repeated with a slightly bitter tone. "Yes, our team. Or have you forgotten that I'm the majority shareholder of the clinic now?" This was the most ironic part of the whole situation. During the divorce process, Lucy had managed to prove that her initial investments in Edward's career, combined with years of unpaid work as an informal administrative manager, entitled her not only to half of the assets, but to 51% of the clinic. Edward managed the medical side, but Lucy controlled all the strategic and financial decisions. Lucy, I know we made mistakes. We didn't make any mistakes, Edward. You made mistakes. I just paid the price for them for too many years. Edward shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I was thinking maybe we could have dinner sometime. Talk about things other than work. Lucy looked at him with genuine curiosity. Edward, what exactly are you suggesting? That maybe we could try again. We're more mature now. We know more about ourselves. Lucy leaned back in her chair and crossed her legs. She was wearing a gray Armani suit that cost more than many people earned in a month, and she knew she looked absolutely stunning. Her financial independence had allowed her to invest in herself in a way she never had when she was just Dr. Edward's wife. Edward, do you really think I would go through what I went through just to end up back in the same place? But it wouldn't be the same place. I've changed. You've changed. Lucy laughed, but there was no cruelty in the sound. Edward, you've had 4 different relationships in the last year. The last one was with a 25-year-old nurse from the clinic itself, causing a scandal that I had to manage to protect our professional reputation. Edward blushed. That was just you being exactly who you've always been. The difference is that now I'm no longer the woman who accepts it silently. Lucy got up and walked to the window, looking at the city view that stretched out before her. You know, Edward, I thank you. You thank me? Yes. Your betrayals forced me to rediscover who I really was. If you had never humiliated me like that, I might have spent the rest of my life being just a diminished version of myself. She turned to face him. Today, I'm the CEO of my own company, the majority shareholder of our clinic, a present mother to our children, and a woman who doesn't need anyone's validation to feel complete. Do you think I'd trade that to go back to being the wife who pretended not to see your lies for years? Edward was silent for a long moment. Lucy, I still love you. No, Edward! You miss controlling me. You miss having an intelligent woman organize your life while you played at being the irresistible conqueror. But true love requires respect, and you never truly respected me. Lucy's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was Mateus, now 12, calling from school. Mom, can you come to the science presentation this afternoon? Of course, my love. I wouldn't miss it for the world. What about Dad? Lucy looked at Edward, who nodded, indicating he would also be there. He'll be there too. Cool. Are we going to have dinner together afterward? It was a question Mateus asked occasionally. The eternal hope of children that their parents would be a family again. Lucy always answered with gentle honesty. No, honey, but you'll have dinner with Dad and then come home with me. Remember, tomorrow is our movie night. Okay, Mom, love you. I love you too, my love. When she hung up, Edward was watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. You're an amazing mother, he said softly. I always have been. The difference is that now I don't have to be just that. Edward got up to leave, but stopped at the door. Lucy, are you seeing anyone? Lucy smiled. That question always came eventually. Edward, my personal life is no longer your business, just as yours isn't mine. In fact, Lucy had gone out a few times with interesting men in recent months. An international lawyer she had met at a conference, a tech entrepreneur who had become a client of her consulting firm, and even a plastic artist she had met at an art opening. But she was at a stage in her life where she was learning to be happy with herself, with no rush to commit again. But if I were, she added with a playful smile, it would be with someone who values me from the very first date. After Edward left, Lucy went back to her desk and continued working. She had a meeting with investors in an hour. She was considering expanding the consulting firm to Sao Paulo. And then there was Mateus's presentation at school. Juliana brought in her afternoon coffee and some documents to sign. Mrs. Santana, an invitation arrived for the Santa Cruz Hospital Charity Gala. It's in 2 weeks. Lucy picked up the elegant invitation and smiled. It was the same event where, 2 years ago, she had confronted Vera and begun her journey back to herself. Confirm my attendance, she said, and reserve a table for 10 people. I'll invite some important clients. Are you going alone? Lucy considered the question. Ricardo, the international lawyer, had mentioned that he would be in Rio on those dates. He was intelligent, successful, and had the kind of genuine sophistication that didn't need external validation. More importantly, he treated her as an equal. He respected her intelligence and her independence. Actually, I'm going to make an invitation. That afternoon, at the boys' school, Lucy sat next to Edward at Mateus's science presentation. The boy had made a project about renewable energy that was impressively sophisticated for his age. During the presentation, she noticed other parents looking at them with curiosity. The famous divorced couple who maintained a civilized relationship for their children. He inherited your intelligence, Edward commented quietly. And your determination, Lucy replied, watching Mateus passionately explain his project to the judges. After school, while Edward took the boys to dinner, Lucy returned to her apartment in Lagoa. The space she had created for herself was a perfect reflection of who she had become. Elegant without being ostentatious, comfortable without being sloppy, sophisticated without being cold. She poured herself a glass of wine and went out to the balcony, watching the sunset paint the lagoon in golden hues. Her phone vibrated with a message from Ricardo. Just got to Rio. Free for dinner tomorrow? Lucy smiled and typed. Yes, yeah, I know a perfect place. In fact, she knew several perfect places. Restaurants she had discovered on her own, experiences she had lived for her own sake, a life she had built brick by brick, without depending on anyone. 2 weeks later, Lucy arrived at the Santa Cruz Hospital charity gala in a navy blue Elie Saab dress that made her look like a modern goddess. Ricardo was by her side, elegant in his tuxedo, talking easily with the other guests in fluent Portuguese, with a charming foreign accent. Lucy's table was full of clients, business partners, and friends, people who respected her professional competence and admired her personal journey. She moved through the event, greeting acquaintances, introducing Ricardo, and discussing business opportunities. That's when she saw her. Vera was on the other side of the room, looking visibly older and more tired, talking animatedly with a gray-haired gentleman whom Lucy recognized as a recently divorced businessman. She was wearing a dress that clearly tried to be elegant, but screamed too much effort. When their eyes met, Vera hesitated for a moment, as if considering whether to approach. Lucy simply nodded politely and continued her conversation with the director of a large private hospital, who was interested in hiring her services. Later, Edward arrived alone, greeting acquaintances, but clearly uncomfortable. He looked in the direction of Lucy's table several times, watching her laugh genuinely at Ricardo's jokes, and seeing how she naturally commanded the attention of the people around her. During the charity speech, Lucy was invited to the stage as one of the main contributors to the new pediatric wing. When she went on stage to speak, there was a respectful silence in the hall. 2 years ago, she began, her clear, confident voice echoing through the microphone. I was just the wife of a famous doctor. Today, I'm the CEO of my own company. I employ 40 people, and I contribute to our community not just with donations, but with concrete results. She looked out at the audience, her gaze briefly passing over Edward and then Vera. Sometimes, life's greatest challenges force us to discover strengths we didn't even know we possessed. And when that happens, we don't just survive, we thrive. The applause was deafening. Lucy came down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by people wanting to congratulate her, make partnerships, and invite her to other events. At the end of the night, as she and Ricardo were leaving, Edward intercepted her in the lobby. Lucy, can I talk to you for a minute? Ricardo discreetly moved a few steps away, giving them privacy. You were magnificent up there, Edward said, and there was something broken in his voice. Thank you. I made the biggest mistake of my life losing you." Lucy looked at him with genuine compassion. "Edward, you didn't lose me. You freed me. And in the process, you freed yourself too. Now, we can both be who we really are, without the ties of a marriage that had stopped working a long time ago. But the boys? The boys have two parents who love them and who are learning to be better people separately. That's much healthier than growing up seeing an unhappy mother pretending everything is okay." Edward nodded slowly. "You are an extraordinary woman, Lucy. You always have been. I just took too long to realize it. And I took too long to realize I didn't need your recognition to know my own worth." They parted amicably, Edward heading to his car alone, Lucy walking arm in arm with Ricardo to his. "Difficult conversation?" Ricardo asked, gently. "Not really, it was liberating." In the car, Ricardo held her hand. "You are a fascinating woman, Lucy Santana. Intelligent, powerful, compassionate. How could anyone have been foolish enough not to value that?" Lucy smiled, looking out the window at the city that was now truly hers. "Some people have to lose what they have to realize its value. Others have to be lost to rediscover their own value. And which one were you? I was the second. And it was the best thing that could have happened to me." When they arrived at her apartment, Lucy invited Ricardo up. There was no rush between them, no desperation or need for validation. They were just two intelligent, successful adults choosing to spend time together because they respected each other. On the balcony, with the lagoon shimmering under the city lights, Ricardo hugged her from behind as she looked out at the view. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I'm thinking," Lucy said, leaning against him, "that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a much better one." And for the first time in years, Lucy knew with absolute certainty that she wasn't just surviving her life. She was living it fully, on her own terms, as the absolute queen of her own destiny.